In a small African village, a poor widow carried a wooden tray of bread on her head every morning. She walked barefoot through the dusty market while people laughed and whispered, "Look at her, widow of a nobody, selling bread to feed her hungry boys." Even her children were mocked, called sons of a bread seller. But what no one knew was that inside her tray of bread, she carried a dream far bigger than the market. Years later, those same boys would return. Not in rags, not in shame, but as billionaires, flying their mother home in a private jet. And when the villagers saw her step out in honor, they bowed their heads in shock. This is the story of the widow they mocked, and how her pain became her crown. Hey, stick with me till the very end. You won't believe what happened next, and I promise it's worth every second. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to our growth. Let's go. The story begins with Mama Adiz, a young widow whose husband, Chike, died suddenly after a brief sickness. One morning, she woke up and found herself alone in the world with 3 little boys looking up to her. The compound that used to echo with her husband's laughter now carried only silence, broken by the cries of hungry children. In the African way, she expected her late husband's family to stand by her, but instead, they turned cold. They said, "A woman without a man is like a goat without a rope." They left her to fend for herself. But Mama Adiz refused to give up. Every day before the cock crowed, she tied a wrapper around her chest, strapped her baby to her back, and held the hands of the other 2. Her eyes were red from crying, but her heart was firm. She told herself, "If I must suffer to keep my children alive, then I will suffer with pride." The villagers looked at her with pity, but some with mockery. Little did they know, the bread of her suffering would one day rise higher than their laughter. After her husband's burial, Mama Adiz looked around her empty compound. The farm was too small, the debts were too big, and her children's stomachs cried louder than her heart. She had only one option: find something to sell. One morning, she borrowed a little money from a kind neighbor and used it to buy flour. With her own hands, she mixed, kneaded, and baked bread in a small clay oven. The smell of fresh bread filled the air, but it was not the smell of wealth. It was the smell of survival. Every day, before the sun stretched its arms across Ozioma village, Mama Adiz carried a heavy tray of bread on her head. Her baby clung to her back while the 2 older boys walked beside her. She went from house to house, from market to market, calling out in a tired but firm voice, "Come and buy bread. Fresh bread is ready." Some people bought from her, others ignored her, but many laughed. They whispered, "See, widow woman, once a wife of Chike, now a common bread seller." Their words cut deep, but her hunger for her children's future was stronger than their mockery. And so, the burden of bread became her crown of strength. Whenever Mama Adiz entered Ozioma market with her tray of bread, the whole place seemed to stop and stare. Her wrapper was old, faded from many washings. Her slippers had holes, and the children by her side wore clothes too small for their growing bodies. As she moved between the stalls, some market women covered their mouths and laughed. They did not laugh because the bread was bad, but because they believed a widow had no place standing tall. One woman selling tomatoes hissed loudly and said, "Once upon a time, her husband was a proud farmer. Now see her, hawking bread like a hungry chicken." Another added, "Her children will grow to be nothing. Poverty has already written their names." These whispers were like arrows, piercing her heart, but Mama Adiz refused to bow her head. Instead, she lifted her voice and called out even louder, "Fresh bread! Come and buy fresh bread!" She wiped her sweat with the edge of her wrapper and kept moving. Behind her brave face, tears threatened to fall, but she swallowed them. She knew something the villagers did not know, that the bread she sold was not only for food today, but also for the future tomorrow. Mama Adiz's biggest dream was that her 3 sons would not remain in the shadow of poverty. She scraped every coin from selling bread, tying it carefully in her wrapper so she could pay school fees. Each morning, she packed their worn-out books into nylon bags and sent them off with prayers. "My sons, go and learn, for knowledge is the only inheritance I can give you." But school was not always a place of joy. The other children mocked them mercilessly. "See the bread seller's children," they shouted. "Your mother is walking up and down with bread on her head. Maybe she will sell some to our teacher too." Sometimes the bullies threw chalk at them or pushed them around during play. The humiliation was heavy, but the boys clenched their fists and remembered their mother's words. "Do not fight with stones when you can fight with wisdom." At break time, while other children bought meat pie and drinks, the three brothers quietly shared a small loaf their mother had given them. Their clothes were torn, their shoes had holes, yet they kept their heads high. Deep inside, they promised themselves one thing: that one day they would silence the laughter of the world. When the sun went down and Ozioma village grew quiet, Mama Adiz would sit alone in her small mud hut. Her children, tired from school and hunger, would be fast asleep, their soft breaths filling the room. She would stare at their innocent faces and feel her heart squeeze tight. By day, she carried strength like a shield, but at night, she allowed her tears to flow freely. She wept not because she was weak, but because the burden was too heavy for one pair of shoulders. Sometimes she knelt on the cold floor, lifting her hands toward heaven. "God of widows," she prayed, "I have nothing to give these children but my sweat. Please turn my sweat into their success. Let their future not look like my present." Her whispered prayers became the music of the night, and her tears watered the ground like hidden seeds of destiny. The neighbors often wondered how she kept moving with courage, not knowing that each morning, her strength was born from those secret nights. She knew tomorrow held no promise, but she also believed that her cries were not in vain. Someday, somehow, her prayers would speak louder than her poverty. One hot afternoon, Mama Adiz balanced her tray of bread on her head, sweat rolling down her face as she walked through Ozioma Market. The sun was cruel, the dust clung to her skin, and her legs trembled from tiredness. Just as she was about to give up for the day, an old man sitting under the shade of a mango tree called her. His name was Papa Natazi, the oldest man in the village, known for his wisdom. He looked at her with gentle eyes and said, "Daughter, I see how people laugh at you, but let their laughter not enter your heart. Do you know bread? Bread rises higher when it is placed in fire. You too will rise from this fire." His words shocked her. Nobody had ever spoken to her like that. He bought 3 loaves, even though he had no teeth to chew much, and pressed a few extra coins into her hand. "Use this to buy more flour," he whispered. Mama Adiz bowed her head, tears filling her eyes. Not from sorrow this time, but from hope. That day, the widow walked back home lighter than she came, not because her tray was empty, but because her spirit was full. After Papa Natazi's words sank into her heart, Mama Adiz began to see life differently. She realized that selling bread was not just about survival. It could also be the ladder to her children's future. That night, while her sons slept soundly on their raffia mats, she sat by the lantern light, thinking deeply. She whispered to herself, "My children will not inherit this poverty. They will not be mocked as sons of a bread seller forever. I will make sure of it." The next morning, she rose earlier than usual. With fresh energy, she kneaded her dough, shaping each loaf with determination. As she baked, she began to teach her sons lessons between the cracks of her struggle. "Adiz," she told her first son, "education is your key. If you carry books the way I carry this tray, one day the world will carry you." To the second and third sons, she said the same in different ways, planting dreams like seeds inside their hearts. From that day, every loaf she sold was no longer just bread. It was a brick, slowly building the foundation of a new destiny. Her vow was clear. Poverty would end with her, not pass through her to the next generation. Even though money was scarce, Mama Adiz refused to let school slip from her children's hands. Many times, she had to choose between eating a full meal or paying part of their school fees. And always she chose the school fees. The boys often saw her counting coins late at night, pressing them flat with her palm as if trying to stretch them into more. Sometimes the headmaster threatened to send them home, but Mama Adiz would rush with bread to beg him, offering loaves in place of cash, just so her sons could stay in class. Her 3 boys, though often tired and hungry, carried their books like treasures. They sat under mango trees after school, reading by the fading light, while their mates played football. When their slippers tore, they walked barefoot yet still attended class. Other children laughed, calling them sons of the bread woman. But the boys remembered their mother's words, "Knowledge will wash away shame." At night, when the lantern flickered weakly, Mama Adiz made sure each child read a page before sleeping. Sometimes she dozed off with her head resting on the tray she used for hawking, but in her dreams she saw her children wearing suits, walking in tall buildings far away. Poverty tried to hold them, but education was the rope pulling them out. When Mama Adiz's husband died, she thought his family would stand by her. In Ozioma village, tradition said the kindred must care for widows and orphans. But when she went to her husband's elder brother, begging for a little support, he looked at her with hard eyes. "Adiz, we cannot carry you and your children. If you cannot survive, give us the boys. We will send them to the farm. At least they can bring us profit." Her heart broke. She knew giving her sons away would mean destroying their education and future. So she bowed her head, thanked him quietly, and walked away with empty hands but a strong resolve. Other relatives mocked her too. Some said, "Why not marry again? A woman cannot carry life alone." Others whispered that she was cursed, that her poverty was punishment. But Mama Adiz wiped her tears and held her children close. She told them, "Do not expect help from anyone, not even family. Our destiny is in God's hands, and in our own hard work." Though rejected by those who should have cared, she built her own strength. Their rejection became her fuel, and their insults became the fire that pushed her forward. Life in Ozioma village had become too heavy for Mama Adiz. The market mockery, the rejection from family, and the small money from selling bread could no longer cover school fees and feeding. One evening, as she watched her children sleep on empty stomachs, she made a bold decision. She would leave the village for the city. People laughed when she said it. "Accra?" They jeered. "Even people with husbands struggle there. You, a widow, will die in that city." But Mama Adiz's heart was stronger than their words. With only a small bag of clothes, her tray, and the little coins she had saved, she boarded a crowded bus to Accra with her 3 sons. The journey was long, the road rough, but her eyes were filled with hope. When they arrived, the noise of the city welcomed them. Cars honking, traders shouting, music blaring. To her, it sounded like opportunity. She found a small one-room shack in a poor neighborhood, and the very next morning, she was back on her feet, balancing bread on her head. In Accra, nobody knew her as the widow of Ozioma. She was simply the bread seller, fighting silently for a better tomorrow. And in that new land, her story of pain was about to turn into a story of destiny. Accra was not an easy land. The first morning, before the sun touched the rooftops, Mama Adiz tied her wrapper, lifted her heavy tray of bread, and walked with her boys to the bus park. The air was already full of shouting, conductors calling passengers, sellers running from one bus to another, drivers blowing their horns as if they were at war. Into that chaos, Mama Adiz stepped with her calm but tired voice. "Hot bread! Fresh bread! Come and buy your bread!" Passengers leaned out of windows, some buying, some bargaining. She ran from one junction to another, chasing buses before they moved. Her boys followed closely, helping her carry smaller baskets. Sometimes the bread fell to the ground, and cruel laughter rose from bystanders. Yet, she picked it up, dusted it, and kept moving. Hunger did not allow shame to sit with her. By evening, her legs ached like fire, her throat was dry, but she returned with a few sadies tied inside her wrapper. That little money meant school fees, gari for supper, and hope for another day. The city was harsh, but Mama Adiz knew something. If she could survive Ozioma's mockery, then she could survive Accra's streets. In Accra, Mama Adiz thought life would be different, but mockery followed her like a shadow. As she balanced her tray of bread and called out to passers-by, some would stop, not to buy, but to laugh. Young men sitting at corners would clap and shout, "See the bread widow, carrying her whole life on her head." Others added cruel jokes. "If her husband could not live, how will she live with only bread?" Sometimes, university students passing by would laugh loudly, pretending to offer money but snatching their hands back, just to see her embarrassment. Even small children joined in, pointing fingers at her boys and saying, "Look, the sons of bread." It was as if poverty had written their names on their foreheads for the world to see. But Mama Adiz never stopped. She swallowed the pain like bitter medicine and walked with her head high. She told her sons, "Let them laugh, but don't let their laughter enter your heart. One day you will laugh louder than them." Though the road was hard, she carried her tray like a crown, not knowing that the same people mocking her today would one day clap when she returned in glory. One hot afternoon, the bus park was crowded as usual. Mama Adiz ran from one bus to another, sweat dripping down her face, her wrapper loose from the day's struggle. Her voice was hoarse, but she still called out, "Fresh bread, hot bread, come and buy." In that moment, a shiny black car stopped by the junction. Inside sat Madame Efua, a well-known businesswoman in Accra, dressed in fine lace and gold jewelry. She had come to pick her daughter from the university nearby. While others only laughed at Mama Adiz, Madame Efua watched her closely. She saw how the widow carried her tray with dignity, how her children followed with discipline, never begging, never stealing. Something in her heart moved. She called her driver to buy all the loaves of bread at once. When Mama Adiz rushed forward, confused, Madame Efua smiled and said, "I see you are a strong woman. Tell me, how do you manage this life with children alone?" Tears filled Mama Adiz's eyes as she told her story. That day, for the first time, someone listened not to mock but to encourage. Madame Efua gave her extra money and promised, "Keep working hard. I will help you when the time is right." Those words became like fresh wind in the widow's tired heart. Weeks after that meeting at the bus park, Mama Adiz thought Madame Efua had forgotten her. Life went on, selling bread, running after buses, sweating in the hot sun. But one morning, a letter arrived at her small wooden door. It was from Madame Efua. Inside was an invitation. She wanted to see Mama Adiz and her children at her office. Nervous but hopeful, the widow dressed her sons in their cleanest clothes and went. In the tall glass building, the boys stared wide-eyed at the lifts and shining floors. Madame Efua welcomed them warmly. She had spoken to her connections and discovered a scholarship program for brilliant but poor children. After testing and interviews, her first son, Adiz's pride, was chosen. He had passed with flying colors. The scholarship would cover his secondary school and possibly even take him abroad later. Mama Adiz wept openly in the office. She knelt down and held Madame Efua's hands, saying, "You are the angel I prayed for." For the first time, she saw a small crack of light in her dark tunnel. Poverty had caged her family for years, but now education, the very thing she fought for with bread money, was about to lift them into a new season. Years passed quickly. Mama Adiz's first son, Chimika, studied hard under the scholarship. While others played, he spent long nights with books. Many times he remembered his mother running in the hot sun with bread on her head, and he told himself, "If Mama can suffer this much for us, then I will not waste her tears. His results were always top of the class, and soon he caught the attention of foreign sponsors. One evening, while Mama Adiz was arranging her loaves, a letter arrived again. This time, it was not just any letter, it was an admission into a foreign university in America with a full scholarship. When Chimika read it aloud, the whole room shook with shouts of joy. Mama Adiz fell to her knees, crying and thanking God. Her neighbors, who once mocked her, stood by the door in shock. The bread seller's son? Going abroad? They whispered. Though she was afraid of letting her son go so far, she encouraged him, pressing her rough hands on his head in blessing. My son, go and shine. Do not forget where you came from. That night, for the first time, her tears were not tears of sorrow, but tears of victory. When Chimika landed in America, the city lights amazed him. Tall buildings stretched into the sky like giants, cars moved faster than he had ever seen, and the cold weather pierced his skin. But in his heart, he carried Ozioma village, his mother's sweat, and the bread tray that raised him. The scholarship paid his school fees, but not all his needs. So while he studied in the day, he worked small jobs at night, cleaning restaurants, washing dishes, carrying loads in supermarkets. At times, hunger followed him even in this new land. Sometimes he could afford only bread and water, and it reminded him of home. But instead of shame, it gave him fire. He told himself, if Mama could carry bread in the hot sun, I can carry books in the cold night. Back home, Mama Adiz sold more bread to support the little she could. Whenever she received his letters or heard his voice on the phone, her heart swelled with pride. Her neighbors still mocked, saying she was wasting her time. But she knew better. She was sowing seeds. And now, her first son was watering them with hard work abroad, turning bread into a brighter tomorrow. Back in Accra, while Chimika was pushing his books abroad, Mama Adiz's second son, Obinna, was growing into a different kind of genius. From childhood, he loved to touch radios, wires, and any broken gadget he could find. Neighbors often laughed at him, calling him the boy of useless wires. But inside Obinna's young mind, ideas were burning like fire. In secondary school, Obinna discovered computers. He didn't have one at home, so he spent late hours at cyber cafes watching tutorials, teaching himself how to code, how to design, how to build. Sometimes he spent the little bread money his mother gave him just to buy minutes on the computer. Mama Adiz didn't scold him. She saw the hunger in his eyes, the same hunger she carried when she prayed at night. One day, Obinna built a simple app that helped farmers check market prices for crops using ordinary phones. When he presented it at a local competition, many laughed at him at first. But when investors saw the potential, their eyes widened. Obinna's idea was not small. It could change how farmers sold and earned. Suddenly, the boy who once fixed broken radios was now being called a young innovator. His journey had just begun. The youngest son, Kelechi, was quiet but full of big dreams. While his elder brothers focused on books and technology, Kelechi's eyes always followed the birds flying above Ozioma village. He would run into the open field, stretch his hands and whisper, "One day, I will fly higher than them." Neighbors laughed at him. "Your mother cannot even buy bicycle, and you are talking about flying plane?" They mocked. But Kelechi's dreams refused to die. In secondary school, whenever he saw planes crossing the sky, he told his classmates, "One day, I will not just sit inside that plane, I will command it." Many laughed, but a few believed. His mother never doubted him. She would smile and say, "My son, if your dream is bigger than the bread tray, then carry it. God will provide the strength." Kelechi started reading books about aviation, leadership, and great men who changed nations. He admired leaders who rose from nothing and promised himself he would not just fly a plane but also guide people to dream bigger. Though poor and mocked, he carried a vision larger than his village. He was a boy born for the sky and for leadership. As the years passed, Mama Adiz's compound grew quiet. Her 3 sons were now chasing their dreams, Chimika studying abroad, Obina creating inventions in the city, and Kelechi buried in his books with visions of flying planes. The house that once echoed with the noise of children now carried only the sound of her footsteps and the clinking of plates. At night, she sat by the small lantern, remembering when they used to gather around her after market, sharing stories while eating the leftover bread. Tears often rolled down her cheeks as she whispered, "Ah, my boys, Mama misses you." She prayed for them daily, asking God to protect them in strange lands and give them wisdom greater than their poverty. Yet, even in her loneliness, she found strength. She returned to her bread selling, smiling at customers, though her heart longed for her son's laughter. The villagers still mocked her, saying she had lost her children to the city and abroad. But deep inside, Mama Adiz knew her loneliness was not empty. It was an investment. She had sown them into the world, and one day the harvest would return to her. Even as Mama Adiz's sons began to rise in their different paths, the village tongues refused to rest. At the market square, some women gossiped loudly, She sent her sons abroad and to the city, but do you see any money in her hand? They will forget her there." Others added, "Those boys will never return. They will marry foreign wives and abandon their bread-seller mother." The laughter stung like pepper on fresh wounds. Whenever Mama Adiz passed with her tray of bread, she heard their whispers. They pointed at her slippers, her faded wrapper, her wrinkled hands. To them, her life looked the same, and they believed her dreams were foolish. Some even told their children not to follow her example. But Mama Adiz walked on quietly, her head bowed, yet her spirit strong. At night, she knelt before God, saying, "Father, they may laugh now, but I know you are not done with my children. Let my mockers live long to see my testimony." She had no proof to silence them yet, but her faith was her answer. Deep in her heart, she knew, though they mocked today, one day they would clap. One afternoon, as Mama Adiz balanced her bread tray at the bus park, she overheard 2 young men arguing. One said, "Do you know that Chimika, the bread seller's son, is now in America giving a big speech in front of white people?" The other replied, "Impossible. How can a poor boy from Ozioma village stand before such people?" Their disbelief brought a secret smile to Mama Adiz's face. Not long after, Obina's name began to appear in small newspapers. His farming app was gaining attention, and photos of him shaking hands with men in suits reached even the village. Some people who once mocked now whispered in private, "Could it be true? These sons of the bread woman are rising." Even Kelechi, though still in school, was invited to a youth leadership camp where his bold words amazed his teachers. Soon, stories of his speeches began to reach back home. Mama Adiz's heart swelled. She did not announce it loudly. She only sat by her lantern at night, whispering, "Thank you, Lord. The seeds are sprouting." The village still laughed, but faintly now, for whispers of success had begun to shake their doubts. The day finally came when Chimika stepped back into Ozioma village. It had been many years since he left with nothing but his mother's prayers. Now he returned not as the skinny boy with torn sandals, but as a man, sharp suit, polished shoes, and a convoy of cars behind him. The villagers, who once mocked his mother, stood with wide eyes, whispering, "Is this the bread seller's son?" Chimika had become a global business leader, managing companies that stretched from America to Africa. His hard work in school, his sleepless nights of hustling, had opened doors that even he once thought were locked. But he did not forget where he came from. His first stop was his mother's compound. When Mama Adiz saw him step down from the car, she froze. Her hands trembled, and tears streamed freely. She hugged him tightly, as if she feared he might vanish. "My son, you have returned," she whispered. He knelt before her, saying, "Mama, everything I am today started with your bread tray." That night, The same villagers who mocked her gathered outside her gate, not with laughter, but with songs of praise. The tide had begun to turn. It was a bright morning in Ozioma when the impossible happened. The sound of a roaring engine filled the sky. Children ran out of their huts, pointing upward. Old men shaded their eyes with their palms. Women abandoned their cooking pots. A giant bird, no, a private jet, circled above and slowly descended onto the cleared field near the village. The people could not believe it. Private jet? Here? In Ozioma? They murmured. Some laughed nervously, others trembled, but everyone rushed to see. As the jet's door opened, 3 young men stepped out in fine suits. Chimika, Obina, and Kalechi, the bread seller's sons. Soldiers and aides followed, carrying gifts and speaking into walkie-talkies. Mama Adiz was led forward, her wrapper still simple, her feet in old slippers. The crowd gasped as the 3 men knelt before her in front of everyone. Chimika took the microphone and said, "This is the woman they mocked for selling bread. But today we return not as poor boys, but as sons of honor. Mama, this jet is not ours. It is yours." The villagers bowed their heads in shame. The same lips that once laughed now whispered, "Truly, God lifts the humble." When Mama Adiz's sons led her back into the village, the crowd pressed around them. But the most shocked of all were the market women, the very ones who used to laugh at her torn wrapper, her dusty slippers, and the bread tray she carried on her head. They stood frozen, mouths open, unable to speak. Mama Adiz remembered their voices clearly. "Bread seller, poor widow, your sons will amount to nothing." But now, those same women watched her step out of a luxury car, escorted by men in suits. Their trays of tomatoes and peppers shook in their hands. Some dropped their wares without noticing, too stunned to pick them up. Chimika addressed the crowd. "When my mother sold bread, you mocked her. But it was that bread money that gave us strength to rise. Today we honor her before you all." Obina added, "Never despise small beginnings, for in small things lie great destinies." The market women looked down in shame. For the first time they had no gossip, no laughter. Instead, they whispered among themselves, "Truly, this woman we mocked is greater than us all." The market was never the same again. As Mama Adiz sat in the village square, surrounded by her 3 successful sons, the atmosphere shifted. The very villagers who once laughed at her cracked feet and her bread tray now approached slowly, heads bowed low. Men who once told her she was wasting her time lined up, holding caps in their hands. Women who used to laugh at her wrapper and call her bread widow could not meet her eyes. One of the elders, who had once told her sons they would amount to nothing, stepped forward trembling. "Mama Adiz," he said softly, "forgive us, we did not know what God was planning for you. Please, remember us now that your children are great." Her sons watched quietly, remembering the insults of the past. But Mama Adiz, with tears in her eyes, only smiled and said, "I carried shame alone for years, but today, I will not carry bitterness. What you see is not my doing. It is God's hand." The villagers bowed deeply, asking for favors, school fees for their children, jobs for their youths, even food for their families. The same people who once mocked her weakness were now seeking her strength. Truly, the tables had turned. Gone were the days when Mama Adiz walked barefooted on dusty village roads, her wrapper faded, her tray heavy on her head. Now, when she stepped out, she wore fine clothes her sons had bought for her. Not too loud, not too proud, but simple garments that carried dignity. Her head was no longer bent under the weight of bread. It was lifted high with honor. Whenever she passed through the market, the same women who once mocked her now greeted her with respect, their voices soft. "Good afternoon, Mama Adiz." "God bless you, Mama." Children ran after her car shouting her name, and even elders rose to their feet when she entered a gathering. But Mama Adiz remained humble. She never allowed pride to cover her heart. She still smiled gently at everyone, sometimes even buying bread from young sellers to remind herself of where her journey began. People whispered in awe, "This is not the same widow we once laughed at. This is a woman crowned with honor." Her dignity was not in the fine clothes or the car. It was in the story of her journey. From rags to respect, her life had become a living testimony. The little mud hut where Mama Adiz once wept through lonely nights, where rain leaked through the roof and rats ran across the floor, no longer stood. Her sons decided that the ground which carried her tears must now carry her honor. They returned with architects and builders, and within months, a mansion began to rise where the old hut once leaned. The villagers gathered daily to watch the miracle. Tall pillars rose into the sky, shining tiles covered the floors, and golden paint covered the walls. When the work was finished, a grand palace stood proudly in Ozioma village. The house had many rooms, a wide compound, even running water and electricity, things no one in the village had ever seen. On the day of the unveiling, Mama Adiz was led by her sons into the new mansion. She touched the smooth walls with trembling hands and whispered, "This was once a hut of sorrow. Now it is a house of joy." Tears ran down her cheeks as her neighbors bowed their heads, ashamed of the days they mocked her. The widow who once slept on a mat now walked in a palace. Her story had turned into glory. One bright market day, Mama Adiz returned, not as the bread seller carrying a heavy tray, but as a mother of wealth and honor. She walked into the same market where laughter once followed her footsteps. This time, the market women gathered in silence, waiting to hear why she had come. Behind her stood her 3 sons, carrying envelopes and gifts. Mama Adiz lifted her voice. "Once, I stood in this market with tears on my face, mocked for selling bread. But it was in this same market that God tested my faith. Today, I have not come to boast, but to bless." She opened her bag and began distributing money to widows, those who, like her, struggled to raise children alone. Some wept as they received envelopes. She promised to set up a fund so that no widow in Ozioma would ever have to beg for salt or cry for school fees again. The same women who once laughed at her now knelt, calling her Mama of Mercy. Children danced, drums sounded, and the market turned into a place of thanksgiving. The bread seller who once wept there had returned to plant joy. The elders of Ozioma village gathered and agreed that Mama Adiz's story was too great to be ignored. They declared a festival, not for kings, not for chiefs, but for the widow who once sold bread in their market. Word spread far and wide. People came from neighboring towns, drummers tuned their drums, dancers prepared their steps, and colorful canopies filled the village square. On the day of the festival, Mama Adiz was dressed in the finest wrapper, with beads around her neck and a crown of coral placed gently on her head. She sat on a decorated chair as the crowd chanted her name. The same market women who once mocked her carried baskets of gifts, bowing as they laid them at her feet. Children danced around her, singing, "Mama Adiz, the mother of honor." The chief himself stood and declared, "This woman is a light to our village." She turned her pain into power, and her sons into pillars of greatness. From today, her name will be written in the history of Ozioma. Tears filled Mama Adiz's eyes. She had once been the widow of sorrow. Now she was the heroine of her people. As the sun set over Ozioma, Mama Adiz sat quietly on the balcony of her new mansion, watching children play in the compound. The laughter reminded her of her 3 sons when they were small, barefoot boys carrying books bigger than their bags. She thought of the nights she cried alone, the days she went hungry just to feed them, and the shame she endured in the market. All of it now felt like a distant dream. Her sons stood beside her, Chimika the global business leader, Obina the tech genius, and Kalechi the visionary leader in training. They looked at her with deep respect, each one knowing that without her sacrifices, their lives would not have reached such heights. One of them said softly, "Mama, Your pain gave us wings. The lesson of her life echoed beyond her family. Widows across villages heard her story and found courage. Children from poor homes believed that poverty was not the end. Even her mockers learned that no one should despise humble beginnings. Mama Adiz smiled, her eyes wet with tears of joy. Her journey had not just raised billionaires, it had built a legacy. Truly, her pain had become greatness. Thank you for watching through. Hey, I'm curious. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. And while you're at it, smash that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single update.